A lot of people supply that information, which it seems to be reasonable to supply, but the text doesn't say that. It just says that they found a man and they pressed him into service. Now, I want to focus today on sections 238 and 239, Christ's time on the cross, and particularly his 7 sayings. You need to know the order and the number of sayings that Christ pronounced on the cross.
I have a question for 236 and 237.
Okay.
It says, why did the Roman soldiers scold at Jesus or treated Jesus the way it says they were saintly inspired? Answer with the
Well, at one level, the answer satanically inspired is hardly noteworthy because all sinners' actions are under the control of the prince of the power of the air. And so when you walk according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, you are subject to the control, direction, and so on of Satan. On the other hand, the cruelty of the soldiers here appears to be abnormally high. Neither of the 2 criminals who were crucified with Jesus received the kind of treatment that Jesus did. And so the question is, why this unusual cruelty? And I think that theologically we can argue that Satan's doing his best to thwart God's plan, to hinder God's designs, and he manifests his malice in cruelty. So those are the answers that are theological and not textual in nature. Question?
we can discuss that later.
Okay.
Another thing is question 4. It's 237. It says, why did Jesus refuse the wine with gall?
The wine with gall because remember Jesus said to his disciples in the upper room, I will not drink the fruit of the vine until I drink it with you in the kingdom of heaven. And so Jesus had promised that the next time he drank wine was with his disciples in the kingdom of heaven. Now, later it's going to say that they offered him sour wine, but the Greek word is different. It's not the same word, and it refers to vinegar. So we conclude that since Jesus took the vinegar, that what he was talking about was a specific form of the fruit of the vine, that is wine, and not any product of vine.
When wine gets bad, it turns into vinegar.
Well, actually, grape juice, it goes 2 ways. If it ferments and becomes wine, it, as far as I know, it doesn't ever become vinegar.
Alcohol, after conversion, sugar, alcohol converts to wine.
Sure.
Alcohol converts to vinegar. Alcohol converts to vinegar. That's the next stage.
Okay. The information I have says it doesn't work that way. Now, I'm willing to be corrected. My understanding was that grape juice can go either way, and it depends on the temperature and the conditions inside the grape juice in terms of the yeast that's there, the amount of sugar that's there, the heat that's there, as to whether it goes vinegar or whether it goes wine. And if you check that out and find out that's not correct, please let me know. Okay, section 238, Jesus on the cross. And page 242 is the first, let's see, first saying in the third column there. Luke 23:34, Jesus was saying, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Okay, so this is saying number one from the cross. And if we had clickers, if we all had clickers, I'd like to use the poll everywhere.com to get your opinion on whether God forgave those people and on what basis he forgave them. But let me point out to you that the text translates it Jesus was saying. It doesn't translate it Jesus said. And in Greek, the imperfect tense indicates ongoing action in the past. So what we have here is most likely a repeated statement that Jesus made. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do. I don't know if you've been in severe agony at any point in your life, but it's quite common to become repetitious when you're in a lot of pain. Tend to say the same thing repeatedly. And I suspect that's what's involved here. Now, my answer to the question, did God forgive them, hangs on the phrase, they do not know what they do, okay, what they're doing. And that is that Jesus does not mean they don't know that they're murdering an innocent man. Pilate knew that. The high priest knew that. That was clear. They all knew that they were delivering up an innocent man. But I take it that what they didn't know, and I get this from Peter, who says, if they had known that they were crucifying the Prince of Glory, they would not have done it. What they didn't know was that this person who claimed to be the Son of God was in fact the Son of God. They did not believe his claim. It wasn't like, we know you're the Son of God and we're going to crucify you anyway. They were convinced that he was an imposter and he needed to be gotten out of the way. And so in that particular aspect of what they're doing was a sin of ignorance. And on that basis, then, I am inclined to think that God did forgive them for the sin of ignorance. God, in fact, all of the sins of ignorance that were ever committed in the Old Testament and were the Day of Atonement was for the sins of ignorance of the nation as a whole, were ultimately laid on Christ on the cross. The reason God could forgive those sins in the Old Testament was because he was looking forward to the cross and to that time when Christ would bear the penalty and make propitiation for every single one of those sins. So, just to make sure that you're aware of this, the sacrifices that were offered in the Old Testament did not procure forgiveness. They did not atone for the sin. They did not cleanse the guilt. And the Hebrew writer makes this very clear, that the blood of bulls and goats can never cleanse, never sanctify the cleansing of the soul. So all they were pictures of what was to come. It was the shadow of Jesus coming. And it was in view of what Jesus would do that God acted in the past. And that's what Romans 3:25-26 say, that God, who passed over the sins previously committed, was just in doing so because he was going to set forth Christ as a propitiation for sins. Now, I do not believe that this statement here means that God forgives people who do not repent. Which is why it's so crucial to understand that we're talking about a sin of ignorance. Sins of ignorance, God does not hold people accountable for. They require propitiation. Christ had to suffer. If the only kinds of sins that were ever committed were sins of ignorance, then Christ would have had to suffer on the cross. Because sin is sin, and it requires the propitiation of God's wrath. But God holds people accountable for things that they are aware of, their knowledge and their intention. And my understanding of forgiveness, then, human forgiveness, is that to forgive another is to remove, let me say it this way. Yes. To forgive is to remove the record of another's wrong from the ledger of our relationship with them. It's hard to say what forgiveness means without appearing to say things that I don't mean. I do not, the key thing is the record. I do not mean that you remove the consequences. So there are consequences to sin that forgiveness does not remove. It does not remove them with God. It does not remove them with men. Do I need to illustrate this, or is this obvious? Adam and Eve sin, consequence, they lose the garden. Are they forgiven? Oh, sure, they're forgiven. They get the garden back. No, they don't. Moses sins. Is he forgiven? Yeah. Does he get to go into Canaan? No. Okay. So, was God still angry at Moses? No, God wasn't angry at Moses. Had God genuinely forgiven Moses? Yes. So why doesn't he get to go into Canaan? Well, because forgiveness deals with the record of the wrong and with the need to receive the penalty. And here's where it gets a little confusing for people, that there's a difference between consequence and penalty. The penalty for sin, according to the law, is the soul that sins shall die. That's right. Death is the penalty for sin. But that penalty can be removed, the record can be removed, but the consequences, that's the law of sowing and reaping, those do not get removed. Okay. So let's say that, actually this is true, so real life example, I had someone stole a significant amount of money from me, in the multiple thousands. And that theft, I am willing and ready to forgive that person. That is, I'm ready to remove the record of the wrong from my relationship. But the consequence of that theft is that I do not trust that person anymore. They broke that trust. And I'm willing to allow them to rebuild the trust. But rebuilding trust almost always takes far longer than gaining it in the first place. That's consequences.